I first got clean. I say hello to some of my friends. I might stop by the Guadalupe Dam, jump in that river for little plans. I can't forget about Luke and Bob. I packed my guitar this time. The picker circle starts right at 3, and playing with them guys gets me high. The Texas Hill Country.
Live from Houston, Texas, this is Big Ideas, Small Business with your hosts, Ryan Gendron and Shavonnah Schreiber. And now, the music of Max Flinn.
Starting to feel a little crazy again. I think it's time I start to pack my things. The city life has really got me down.
Welcome to Big Ideas, Small Business. This is a show by business owners, for business owners, side hustlers, entrepreneurs. We're here to get you in business and keep you in business. I'm Brian Gendron, joined by my host, Shavonnah Schreiber. How are you today?
I am doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. What are we going to be doing today?
Talking about personal branding and how, as a business owner, and especially a business owner that may be the CEO or owner of a newer business, your personal brand is really synonymous with your business brand, which is something I don't think people think about quite that often. So we'll talk about how those two things work together and some things that people should keep in mind.
Absolutely. This is a topic that I've done a lot of speaking around, and something I'm very passionate about. I agree with everything you just said. One of my favorite things to think about is if you're not in control of your personal brand, everybody else is making that brand for you.
Yes.
Okay. And so, we'll talk through some of that today and how to really build your personal brand. And a lot of it is just like building out like you build out your business, you build out your mission and your values. Well, you want to do that for yourself and decide how you want to come forward and really find your voice, right? Yeah.
I was listening to, I'm a part of this organization. I guess you'll call it. It's kind of like coaching for coaches. And it's called Optimize Me. And it's really great. It's a great community. And I was listening to a masterclass over the weekend. And one of the things that they said is you have to decide what game you're playing and playing it well. So they said you have to decide whether or not you want to be entertained or evolve, basically, or something along that line. And you just got to decide. So you can't do both. And so I think the same is true when you think about a brand. You got to decide, so who are you? Who do you want to be? And what then translates into your business or how you run your business. And it has to be consistent on both sides.
It almost sounds easier than it is, right? To understand, who you are very well, but when you really sit down and try to put it into a brand, into values, into personal mission, it becomes actually more challenging than you might think. And then, of course, you've got all these wonderful platforms that you can use. Of course, social media, the Instagrams, the LinkedIn's, YouTube, all these great channels that you can take advantage of. And then you got to learn how to do those, or learn how to delegate somebody to do those, and then translate your brand to that person so they're always staying consistent. So it's way harder than it sounds, and it's always evolving, right? The tools and the platforms are changing, and you yourself are changing, and what you have to offer may change.
Yeah, and I think that definitely. So I think this is the way, at least in my mind, the way it goes. So if you are a solopreneur and it literally is just you, then it's easy for your brand, the business brand and your personal brand to be synonymous, because it's just you, and you are the person in direct communication with clients. You're the person producing the thing, whether it's a product or a service. And so I feel like it's easier to do then. I think where a lot of business owners really get into some murkier waters is when you start to grow. So on one hand, when you're an entrepreneur, and this is not true for every entrepreneur, but I think for a lot, where eventually the goal is to become larger than just you being the person in the organization. So whether that's you go from 1 to 5, 1 to 3, or 1 to 300, that's the idea. So each growth moment, there creates this new opportunity for things to get lost in translation. And so, for example, my personal brand may be a person who is geared toward development and growth and always strives for excellence. That may be what I think about personally and what I go forward with personally. But if I add 5 people or 2 people to my organization and delegate a task to them that they're doing on my behalf, if that's not their personal brand, if their personal brand is get things done as quickly as possible, for example, then there are some opportunities for friction. And I think that happens a lot. I think that happens more than many business owners talk about. And not that anyone wants to throw anybody under the bus, but true scenario where that you delegate something out, the person is delegated to produces whatever the thing is in the way that they feel is best and most suitable because that goes with their personal brand. And then you get client feedback that is not what you want. And as you try to reverse engineer and figure out what happened and where maybe there was miscommunications, it ends up, well, what you think is excellence, they don't. And now how do you close that gap? And how do you do that while maintaining good client relationships and also good colleague relationships? So I think that's where it gets harder than it sounds like.
Yeah, I agree. And certainly when it comes to running a company, just like it comes to running your own personal brand, you want to have brand standards. Okay. And I know that's something that y'all at SNR Creative understand very well. But that way, if anybody's using your brand, if you're doing public speaking somewhere, you've got, headshots and things that you can send them. There's colors and fonts and all the things that they need to consider when they're putting in bios. Make sure you're in control of your own bio. So those are things you can do at your personal brand level to again maintain control of that brand. The couple things that I look at is you've talked about this before, Shavonnah. See it through all the way to the end is something that you talked about one of these shows, and that's something I think about. Your legacy. What are you leaving behind? What are you working towards? That's right. It's almost a great exercise from a personal branding perspective to work backwards and say, what is my life going to look like when it's done? And then that can really help inform some of the things that are important to you now and some of the things that you might need to do as far as setting your vision, your personal vision, understanding what that looks like when everything's done, where you're taking your personal brand, whether that's into books or maybe it's something bigger. But know that, have that compass and the different sort of the landmarks along the way, milestones along the way that you can hit, like books and like launching podcasts or whatever those things are to get to you to raise your personal brand along the way to hit that vision and mission.
Yeah. And so I had a person tell me not that long ago that when growing your business in the beginning, as I said, you owner you are the business. So I remember, that this was recently told to me. And then I remember probably maybe 3 or 4 years ago, as I was getting into SNR Creative and running this business full time, not just part time, that someone who had been in business successfully for longer than I had said one of the mistakes that they made is that and I'm using their words, they said they made a mistake and that all of their clients relied on them. Like they wanted to talk to them, they saw them as the expert, and then that became a problem. And then they felt like once they got to the point where they built this team around them, that it was hard for them to move on to be able to do the more strategic work because clients still wanted them to be on the phone, wanted them to be at the meeting, etc. So, this is an interesting balance, right? So it's like on one hand, you're getting the work most of the time because people want to work with you, individual owner, whether you have a team or not. But then at some point, in order to continue to develop business and get more work, you have to back away from the day-to-day engagements. But then you have clients that signed up because they thought they wanted, they thought they were working with you and working with you, Brian, directly. And so now if you say, well, actually, I'm going to pass you over to Sarah, or Sarah's going to be the account manager, not for every client, but for some clients that could cause a bit of I guess, some dissatisfaction that, well, I don't know, Sarah, and how, I want to work with you, and we've worked together over the year, etc. So I think it's something that definitely, as an entrepreneur, that you have to be thinking about. And so at some point, you're using your personal brand and your career capital that you built up over the years to get that business. And then as you build a team around you, whatever that team looks like, then you have to start to translate or transfer, I guess, a bit of that career collateral you have onto the folks in your team, so then they can transfer it to those clients that they're going to serve, and that everyone feels confident about the engagement. Because I definitely, I'm sure you can think of many stories where people want to do business with Ryan. Mm-hmm. And when you pass it along, that becomes a problem.
Yeah, I like the word career collateral. That's well put. One thing I'll say is that's an interesting effect is if you really start to put your own personal brand out there, and we're talking about things like speaking engagements, books, podcasts, and things with Shavonnah's name attached to it, your customers and good clients who've worked with you for years will see that, and sometimes they let you off the hook. I've experienced this personally, where they're like, "Well, Brian's very busy," and they see that and they know that, and then they're more willing to sort of vouch for you and know and trust if you've done it right, that the team that you've selected is in line with that personal brand that they're experiencing and that they're seeing, and give you a little bit of latitude to build the team that can provide that consistent service you're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess the inverse could be true too. So say, for example, this has happened. You make a hire, and by all accounts, it seems like it's going to be a good one, and you feel like some of that has translated over from that brand and the business brand / your personal brand as the owner. And then soon you realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's a misalignment. I think it's at the detriment of not only the business, but then you personally, if you don't resolve that issue as soon as possible. Because I think while clients will give you a bit of leeway in some instances, I think if something is completely out of alignment, then that starts to erode trust. And people start to think, okay, well, maybe you're too busy doing some of these other personal brand building things that your eye is off of the ball on the business side. And so then they don't trust that you can take care of their account. So, I think that, I guess one of the things that I would think as far as a tip or something that I would offer to entrepreneurs is to slow down. And like you said, think about it from the end backward. Of, okay, what ultimately is the legacy that I'm looking to build? What is that? And then reverse engineer it. Because I think we live in this culture where, just go fast and take every speaking opportunity and take every business opportunity. And I think sometimes you can get way outside of your personal integrity, your brand integrity, and then end up making these mistakes that are way more costly than it might seem on the surface.
Yeah, that's right. That's a really good way of looking at it. So then you can make those decisions better and with more clarity as to, is this moving the needle as to where I'm trying to go, or is it not? Does it taking me off the path? And in doing so, and one of the things I mentioned earlier is having your own personal core values. And those you talked about integrity, that allows you to stay grounded in your own and rooted in your own integrity when making those same decisions. So for me, I looked deep and I decided that family, faith, relationships, work-life harmony, creativity, big one, and education are the core values. So if it's in that space,
how many is that?
That's 6. That's 6.
So this is what's funny to me. So this is hilarious. So I don't know who has it easier. I don't know if it's easier to have more because then you have more opportunities that can fit in. Because I have 2, and I did this exercise where it forced you to narrow. It was like you should only have this particular exercise. And there are many, but this particular exercise that I went through was like you should only have 3 at the most. Like that because some of these things layer in and they're like the little dolls, but that really, if you were to look at your 6, do they layer in somewhere? I don't know. Maybe not true for you, but that is funny. So I have 2. Mine are growth and truth, and you have 6. Jeez. So is it easier for you to stay? Do you feel like that it's easier for you, or is it harder for you to choose those things that keep you in integrity?
So some of them I'm willing to compromise on, which sound, you shouldn't compromise on your values, right? So does that really make them a value? But they're prioritized. So for me, family is at the very top, and then faith and relationships. Some of these things kind of work together. You're right. So could they be recategorized? One of my favorites is work-life harmony, not work-life balance. It's sort of I think Jeff Bezos is one that at least initially turned me onto this idea that you're not giving something up necessarily when you're doing work-life harmony, right? It's harmonized.
Right. Blending, harmony. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So really when I kind of look through that and then kind of get held accountable to them by you, I think that is the idea, right? That if I can combine and hit on more of these values with something that I commit to, the more true I can be to myself. And then the further along I can get towards my personal mission.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think for me, I like the fact that I have these two core values, growth and truth. And, it wasn't easy to get down to two, I will tell you that. But then I can 100% of the time point back to one of those. So even if something's uncomfortable, if it's leading me to growth, okay. If it's something I don't want to hear, or that's hard to hear, but it's the truth, I am just like, please tell me. As a matter of fact, I was on a call not that long ago with someone who was a client that was giving some feedback about this particular deliverable. And in that moment, as I was listening to the feedback, I thought, well, there may have been a piece of information or a few pieces of information that I didn't transfer over to the person who was doing the project. And I said that. I was like, oh, well, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, there could be some gaps, and I take the responsibility for that because I may have not given all of the information, all of the files, because there was some time that lapsed in between. I may have not given that over, so I will go and close that gap. I know that there's certain people that would never say that. Like, it's hard for them to admit, like, they dropped the ball. It's not hard for me to admit that at all because it's just, I just believe that I'm in my integrity when I admit if I drop the ball, I drop the ball, and that's just it. And the only way I get the ball back is owning it, correcting, and moving forward. Not the dance and dancing around and trying to spin. And it's just, you know what? Maybe I missed something. Okay, turn the page. So for me, it's easier. Even when it comes to opportunities, I'm like, okay, so is this getting me? If I have an area of growth that I'm really focused on, is this particular opportunity stretching me in that area or not? Is this opportunity do I really feel like this excitement about doing it? So that's the truth. Like, is it true that I feel excitement about this opportunity or not? Not I should do. I don't do that. I don't play that game. The should. Nope. Do I feel excited about it? Do I want to do it? Period. And if not, then I'm not going to do it. And I can feel, so for me, having fewer, I think has really helped me not overcommit. Because I think that was something that I was bumping up against a little bit. That was probably eventually going to erode some of that personal brand. Is if you're spread too thin, then at some point you're going to drop something. So.
Yeah, I really admire the simplicity of that. It certainly makes it easier in the day-to-day to navigate, and like we keep going back to root into your own personal integrity. So that is a good exercise that maybe I could revisit. I popped open a slide deck that I've used for this presentation dozens of times, and this is why we do this, right? Well, it's good to reevaluate those and look at those because you're I do I'm a personal brand in transition. I came out and my own wife she's like, how do I introduce you? What do you do? Like, if your own spouse is asking you that, but it's funny. Like I was at a networking event this weekend and I'm like, look, cybersecurity consultancy is what I do during the day. And then in the evening, I promote comedy shows, like two very opposite and different things. Right. And so that you got to be cautious as to, like you said, spreading yourself thin and I'm a bit more of, I guess, a Renaissance man, and I'm not, I like doing different things that brings me joy. But it can be confusing and you got to be in control of that.
I actually think that it's okay to do different things. I don't think that because actually I fancy myself a Renaissance woman. I just think that no matter if, so for example, we would take that exercise. So if Brian's personal brand was creativity and family, right? Like say creativity, family, and give me a third one. Let's just so we can have three.
Yeah,
What's
I mean,
one of your other ones?
I did work life harmony was a big one.
Okay, so work-life harmony, creativity, and family.
Mm-hmm.
So I could take those three and apply them both to cybersecurity and to comedy show promotion. Because as long as while you're doing that means, okay, I'm not going to promote a show that's going to disrupt my work-life blend. I'm not going to promote a show that's going to be something that's going to be a detriment to my family. And while I'm also not going to promote a show where I can't let my creativity flourish, and I do it in the ways that I think is best. So that, I mean, to me, you can apply that to that, as well as same three. I'm not going to take a project, no matter how big the contract or how, exciting the company, if it's going to be a big disruption to my family and the harmony that I'm looking to maintain, I've built and I want to maintain. I'm also not going to take a project where I can't bring my background and my creative problem solving to the project and really let some of my personality come into it. So I'm not just going to be there pushing a button. And then finally, I'm going to be as creative as I can possibly be whenever I approach this thing. I'm not going to be so narrow-minded and so about the book. So to me, you can do it's not about saying, okay, I'm only going to do one thing, blinders on, and that's how I can not keep myself out of trouble. It's having those core values that no matter what you're doing, you can tether to those and say, okay, this sound, obviously we also live in the world, Brian, where if you get caught in the fear of missing out, then the more of a good personal brand you have, the more opportunities you get. So eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to say no more than you say yes, because you're going to get more opportunities than you can actually sustain. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think sometimes what people think is the opposite. If I'm getting opportunities, I have to take them or they're going to go away. And actually that's not true. You use Jeff Bezos. I'm sure he's asked to speak and show up at conferences way more than he actually goes to, because that's how it goes. But it's getting rid of that fear of, if I say no to this one, there's not going to be another one. And then that sometimes that fear becomes a detriment to that personal brand.
Thank you for that. That's very much helpful for me. And I'm sure it's helpful for a lot of listeners, with people that may struggle with that. Sometimes I'm like, man, if I could just be as focused as this entrepreneur over here, then maybe I would be further ahead. But it's not true to myself. And as I said, getting into these different projects and especially looking at creativity, and I've made the choices that you've talked about. I've made choices specifically for my family. I'm today making choices in my career specifically for my family, where I'm not, traveling. I didn't take a big job where I'd be on the road a lot with cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. I'm choosing a different route with the comedy promotion stuff, where I am staying local as opposed to working the road and doing that whole thing. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. This is why we do this exercise and why we're talking about it here today on the show.
Yeah, one last example on that. There's a musician that I heard in an interview say that they started to only do shows in venues that didn't serve alcohol because they have small kids and they wanted their kids to come with them everywhere they went. They wanted their wife and their children to come and travel with them. And they decided for themselves that it would be a better, safer, more conducive environment for their children to actually be present and even allowed to be present if they only did venues where there was no alcohol served. And I thought to myself, and this is not like some small time, this is a pretty big musician. And I thought to myself, what a commitment to the value of family. They talk about family. A lot of people talk about family, but I think not many people are willing to be as concrete in what that means in application. So like as a business owner, if you say, excellence is something that you value, and that means that you're going to continue to sharpen your saw, well, then that means that you're not going to cut corners, and you're going to have to tell people sometimes it's going to take longer than the other person or the other company that can do it in a short amount of time, and you might lose that business. But it depends on how important excellence really is to you, and if it really is a core value, if you're willing to compromise that or not.
So this is all excellent stuff about, getting rooted to integrity and figuring out your core values. I'd like to spend the last couple of minutes getting more into tactical type stuff, if that makes sense. So
Sure.
if I can share a quick story, when I first started my company, Noxerve, the cybersecurity consulting, which is of course pivoted since we initially started as a IT managed service company. I was going to do anything it took to get PR and as much free PR as I could, because I couldn't afford anything. And one thing that I did, and I'm glad I did it, and it really helped catapult me in the beginning, was aligned with a specific periodical. It was the Houston Business Journal, and just said, this is one I want to work with, and I'm going to figure out how to work with them. And I went right to their beat guys. I'm like, all right, what awards do they have that I can win? And I just focused on that, and that showed big returns for me. So that's one thing that I did early on in starting my company that I thought that bared a lot of fruit and still continue to.
Yeah, I think that's great. I also think speaking opportunities. So both you and I are speakers at University of Houston Small Business Development Center. And I think that speaking opportunities in your area of expertise. So, every industry has some sort of professional network, organization, continuing education thing or things that people attend. So how do you get on the list? And you may have to submit abstracts for a year or 2 years before you actually have one that's accepted. But just like you did with the Houston Business Journal, having a focus on, this is what I'm looking to do. And so if it means it's going to take me 6 months, 9 months, a year before I get on, I'm going to stay with it, because I want to be positioned in this industry as a thought leader. And one of the ways to do that is to be a speaker on a particular topic. And even, going deep on 1 or 2 topics. It's not even that, you have to have this wide variety of topics that you speak on. Maybe it's 1 or 2 things that you really know a lot about and you have a lot of career capital built on. Well, just keep submitting the same abstract over, as much as you can, slight modifications. And until someone bites, I think that can also go a long way. Just being a speaker, being a professional speaker in your industry.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. So one of the next stops that I did in parallel to the efforts with trying to get PR and just get the word out about who I am and what I'm doing was I've stumbled upon Toastmasters, which is a great place to work on public speaking, work on finding your voice, and a place to sharpen any sort of material that you're working on presenting, to get real-time feedback. And so I joined that, and not long thereafter, that's where this show started, right? Because now I'm like, I got just a little boost of confidence to start getting my voice out there, and then be able to speak and be able to say, hey, look, I want to be known, and I am an expert in this IT industry. Let's put that forward. And I started speaking to sometimes people wouldn't even show up, or 1 or 2 people would show up. I spoke last night to 300 people, right? So it's just a different, but you got to start somewhere, and you got to grind it out, and you got to keep working on the fundamentals of speaking, and then, like you said, just grind out and apply to all the speaking opportunities you can get until you get to a point where you have to start turning them down, which is when it flips, right? But
yeah, and I am pro Toastmasters too, and have several distinctions within Toastmasters International, and I think it's a great organization to do just what you said, to sharpen that speaking saw. So we both are like Toastmaster commercials, I think. So definitely. The other thing I would say, I think the core values exercise is something tangible that a business owner I would recommend do. And then I think you said something earlier, Brian, that I think we definitely should mention again, is that maybe depending on where you are in your career and how old your business is, maybe you did core values a long time ago and you need to revisit it. Maybe you've never done it, but you've been in business for 10 years and you need to do this exercise, because I think whether you have 6 or whether you have 2 or 1, I think having those values at the front of your mind will help you filter opportunities for sure. And that will just help, I think, get more and more focused around who you are, how do you show up in the world? What are the things that you represent? And then that builds confidence that people know that reliably you're going to show up in this manner, I think goes a long way. So definitely getting clear on what your values are.
Yeah, and then another thing we hit on earlier that I want to revisit is just the platform. So understanding how the platforms work, understanding what your demographic is and where they spend the majority of their time, making one of them your core platform, but then also acknowledging that all the other platforms, and of course I'm referring to mostly social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all, those platforms. Make sure you have consistency in your personal brand across all those platforms. And like I mentioned, colors and bio and everything that you can. If you can't, if those skills aren't something that now, not necessarily something you need to pick up, but you do need to be able to figure out how to communicate to somebody who has those skills that you're going to outsource that to. But those things are critical. And here's one that, people come to me all the time and say, Brian, I want to start a podcast. And I say, great, let's start with the end in mind. What are we trying to build here? And, what are your goals? And of course, I've been teaching at SBDC podcasting for years. And one of the neat things that I've helped people understand is, look, if you're doing episodic, kind of like we do once a month, but if you're doing this once a week and you hit different topics, guess what you're doing? Over time, you're writing a book if that's what your goal is. And a lot of them are like, oh, the light bulb goes off, like, oh, here's how I'm going to write my book. Like, get all that content put together and then pass it over to a ghostwriter or brave it out yourself and get that all on the page. You can get it transcribed easily. So figure out I guess my point is figure out what your content engines are. Podcasts are great for long form content, just to get it out there. Mm-hmm. And then they can be chopped up into micro content that then can be distributed to these other platforms, like I mentioned earlier, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, to draw people to your long form content and again, grow your personal brand.
One exercise that comes to mind when you mention that is, I think it's helpful to look across your industry, whatever, and it can be any industry, right? And find who are the top 5 people in the industry and why, and what, even top 5 is relevant. So is it because they are often on the agenda to speak? Is it because they have books? Is it because they have a blog with a lot of followers or a social channel with a lot of followers? But who are the top people and what are they doing? Because I think a lot of times it would seem as if some of the people who are in, any particular field who are at the top, all they do is produce content. But you and I both know that's not true. So they may be producing some content and then one piece of content that's syndicated 7 ways. And that is chopped into, like you said, these micro snackable pieces that's all transcribed, put into a book that turns out to be blogs, et cetera, et cetera. But figuring out who those people are in your industry that are at the top of their game that you really admire. And then what's one thing that they do that you say, you know what, I'm going to start adding that. I'm going to learn more about this and start adding that into my brand repertoire. And this is going to be something I work on over the next 6 months, 12 months to really build. I think that goes a long way too, because it can feel overwhelming. There are a lot of channels, there is a lot of content. It can feel very overwhelming. And I think what we're here to say is that it doesn't have to be. You don't have to do everything. You just have to do the things you're going to do well, because it does translate over into your business brand. And I think that it's possible. I know it's possible. You just have to have a little bit of focus around it.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. I can't agree more. Look at the major influencers in your industry. And I want to throw in one extra thing there. You said, what are they doing well in this new, pandemic world, 6 months in? What are they not doing that's new that you could actually add to it? That's something to really look at, and something that's helped me a ton in comedy, because there's this is the way things have been done for a long time. Well, guess what? You can't do them like that right now. So how can I innovate and then take advantage of that opportunity? And so,
because you have this IT and technology know-how, I think that you had a competitive advantage, right? So technically, there are comedians who they show up at comedy clubs or play venues, and they stand and they speak and they make jokes. Well, when all of a sudden that is no longer an option, they can't just Zoom a comedy show, right? How to do it becomes a big barrier. Well, you already have knowledge and know-how as it relates to technology. So I would imagine that you had a lot easier time being able to pivot than those who just didn't have that know-how. So like you said, what is that gap? And then how can you creatively fill it?
Excellent. So I think we covered a lot of great things for people thinking about personal brand. If you have other ideas or thoughts that this is something I'm passionate about, Shavonnah clearly as well. So if this is something you want to continue the discussion on, reach out to us on social media, and we'd love to hear from you and work through it with you. So any other closing remarks for you?
Yeah,
Shavonnah?
I think really the thesis of our entire podcast today is, really get clear on, what are those things that are most important to you? What are those core values that are important to you, the person, and then how those translate into your business, and then thus to your client, and making sure it's consistent. I mean, that's a word that if this was Toastmaster and consistent was our word, our counter would be off the charts, because I think you said that so many times. We both said it, consistency. So I think that's it. Just who are you? What are those core values? And then making sure it's consistently applied.
Absolutely. Well said. So thank you, Shavonnah, for joining us. Thank you, everybody out there listening. Now get out there and close some business.
The fourth quarter. We're doing it for the fourth quarter.
Let's do it. All right. Bye, y'all.
Central Texas rain's the strongest drink I found.
Thank you for listening to Big Ideas Small Business. Follow us at BISB Media and visit our website at www.bisbmedia.com.